So earlier this year, Arctic replaced their Alpine 11 passive with a new black anodized version called the Alpine 12 passive. Now, apart from the obvious colour change, they also state that the anodisation of the aluminium helps it dissipate heat more effectively. So, challenge for today is to see whether we can actually notice a difference between the two coolers. So if we just have a little bit closer look at the CPU cooler itself, it's very similar to the previous version. Still has MX2 thermal compound pre-applied to it. It still has 20 fins in its design, and it also weighs just over 500 grams. Interestingly, it's actually about 20 grams less than the 11, at least that's what the formal specification states. But other than that, it's basically the same. It's designed for Intel CPUs and to cool a 35 watt TDP CPU. So we'll install this into a setup with a Gigabyte Mini-ITX motherboard and an Intel 35 watt CPU. In this case, we're going to use an i5-7600T. We will then run through a range of tests, mostly AIDA64, potentially some Prime 95, and check the thermals as we go through those tests and see whether we can notice any difference between the new 12 version and the previous 11 version. So first of all, let's have a look at the tests that we actually ran. We used AIDA64 and we did 3 runs of the CPU stress test, where that's basically using the CPU, FPU, cache and memory all being tested at the same time. We then did 2 runs of the CPU plus GPU stress test. This is basically the same as above, we're just adding in the GPU load as well. All of these runs were conducted with an undervolt set on the motherboard, moving it down to 1 volt rather than the auto voltage. This was something that we'd covered in the previous video when we were stressing this particular processor out, and I'll include a link to that video in the description below. One thing I did do was I actually weighed the Alpine 12 passive because I couldn't see any difference between it and the Alpine 11, and it actually weighs 534 grams on my scales, and the Alpine 11 weighs 530. So it's definitely more than the 508 that's quoted on the technical data at the Arctic website, and it's slightly more than the Arctic 11, which kind of makes sense with the anodization added to it. So, stepping into the results themselves, the first one we're going to look at is the CPU plus GPU stress test. This one we know is going to throttle due to the amount of power that's being put through the CPU, and the cooler can't handle it. But we're just looking to see if there's a difference here. So both of the 2 runs for the Alpine 11 are in red, 2 slightly different reds, and the Alpine 12 are in 2 different blues. And what we can see here is it looks like the Alpine 12 is handling that heat slightly better and is able to run a little bit longer, 30 seconds to a minute maybe, longer before it actually starts to throttle. So that's a potential win for that CPU, for that cooler. And then if we step into the second set of results, this is just a CPU stress test. Now this is one where we're not expecting it to throttle. In our previous work before, we saw that they would run at just over 70 degrees and hold that temperature pretty consistently. And what we're seeing here again, we've got the Alpine 11 here in red, and we have the Alpine 12 in blue. We've only got 2 runs here for the Alpine 11. One of the runs, the logging failed, so I haven't included that. And we have 3 runs here for the Alpine 12. And as you can see, initially, when they start out, the 2 coolers are working very similarly. The red and blue lines are basically sat on top of each other. But as the temperature increases over time, we're seeing that the Alpine 11 actually has got a higher temperature than the Alpine 12, to the point after 30 minutes or so, there's a difference of 2, almost 3 degrees centigrade between the 2 setups. So that would suggest that indeed the Alpine 12 is able to dissipate heat better than the Alpine 11, and that anodization is making a difference. And it's only 2 or 3 degrees, but in a passive system that can be quite significant. So to Arctic, nice colour change, and also looks like indeed you have improved the performance of your cooler. Good stuff.